I've learned that people will forget what you've said. They will forget what you've done, but they will never forget how you've made them feel. If you are in the business of creating interactive experiences, you are in the business of invoking feelings and inducing emotions. And part of the reason why we're here, part of the power of virtual reality is the ability to deliver a more immersive and more emotional experience to players than ever before. Whatever your vision for that impactful experience is, the goal of the Oculus ecosystem team is to help you as a developer succeed. Although our conversation is going to be a lot about nuts and bolts of different processes that we have, I just want to remind everyone that at the heart of the decisions we make as the Oculus content team, that is what it is, developer success. So as a part of this conversation we'll be having today, I'll be talking about how to ship successfully on the Oculus Store and the processes involved therein. From performance to content, marketing assets even, we'll be discussing several factors that we see on the ground that affect your overall quality of your VR application and how successful you end up being, right? With that, I'll just kind of briefly discuss the format of the panel, and we're going to dive right in. So the aim of the discussion is really to keep it conversational and meaningful. So I'll be doing my best as moderator to make that happen. We have only 45 minutes, so there will be no live Q&A here. But directly after the panel, if you follow us, we'll be going down to the speaker pavilion, and we'll be there at least 30 minutes, so you can ask deeper or more detailed questions to members of the panel there. In lieu of that, I do have a few questions that I fielded from Twitter that I'll be asking to the panel as well. And I believe that takes care of the housekeeping. So let's get it going with some quick introductions and then some questions. First myself, hey, how's it going, people? My name is Bruce Wooden. I'm part of the content team in Oculus. I do content review and publishing review. My background is in user experience, product management, dev community. I've played thousands of VR experiences. I've administered hundreds of VR demos and playtests, so that's kind of where I'm coming from here. And I have a very esteemed panel of people that I'll be sharing the stage with today. On my direct left is Lisa Brewster. Lisa manages the app review and publishing team at Oculus. Her background is actually in leading app review programs at Palm, WebOS, and Firefox add-ons, for example. She specializes in small batch, artisanal, handcrafted review programs, which is how we like to think of ourselves at Oculus, I think. Next up is this dude, Chris Pruitt. He's the director of content ecosystem at Oculus. He spent the past 5 years at Oculus helping third-party developers see that VR success, done a lot of hard work in. And he has nearly 2 decades of game industry experience. He also, for some reason, loves bad horror games. Next, over there is Madi Kyle. Madi is also on the content team, do content and publishing review as well. She was previously at Sony Pictures Television working on content development and VR titles. She helps build experiences, tie together narratives across platforms. She has an MFA in interactive media and game design from USC and is also an avid gamer and an indie game developer herself. So she has that unique perspective. And far on the end there is my man Richard Duck. Richard is store operations at Oculus. He's been in the games industry for a little over a decade, including a great time at Nintendo. He's been also a leader in diversity and inclusion efforts, both at Nintendo and also here with us at Oculus too, which is also fantastic. So there we go. That's our panel. So we're going to get right into it. First question. Why do we do content review anyway, guys? Like, what is content review even about? Why do we do it? Tell me about this process and what's it for. Anybody?
I can start there. So the purpose of our review process as a whole is goes through multiple phases to check both the technical quality and what's different about us is that, look, if you're coming from kind of a mobile background, you're used to shipping on Apple and Google, you have a checklist of things to do or not do, and then you get published on the store. We have a little bit of that in our technical review process. But then in the content review phase, this is where we're a little bit different. This probably pulls a little bit from my background, working on multiple different kinds of app stores, and also the developers that we work with. Both come from a mix of the mobile world and like the PC and console worlds in VR. So in the content review phase, we're a little bit different where we actually are a curated store, and we're checking to see if the content is like actually interesting and fun and useful. Because the feedback that we get from users is that whenever they first get into VR, they're really overwhelmed with all of the choices, or they're really nervous that something's going to make them sick and not feel well. So we're really leaning more heavily into that curation side so that we can make sure that as users experience this new platform, that they have a good experience every time and they're always going to find something that they enjoy.
I'd just add that we went pretty, even from the very beginning with Rift, we've been pretty strict about technical requirements like performance, and that's because it directly equates to user comfort. We know that applications that run under our target performance, things like if you're on Rift and you're at 80 or 90 hertz, you're probably going to be fine. We know that your motion to photon latency is going to be short enough that you're not going to feel bad unless the software is poorly authored. But we know if the software is very well authored but running at a lower frame rate, there's a whole class of folks that are going to feel uncomfortable. So we built our review process, even from the very early days of Oculus, to ensure that our customers are getting something that is going to be comfortable for them to use, even if they are on one side of the sort of VR comfort spectrum or the other. And on top of that, we also, you've seen that we do assignments for comfort rating. And that is for us to try to give our customers a security and understanding about what they're going to get into. But for us to know what the rating should be or know if something is passing a technical test, we have to do a review.
Marty, this question is for you. Because you have such a deep experience with interactive media and design, aside from the performance things that we've kind of discussed here with Lisa and Chris, what are some of the common pitfalls in the content and experience design that you're seeing on the ground right now?
Sure, yeah, I think that one of the biggest things I've seen with a lot of developers is that because they're so close to all their titles, they kind of get lost in what they're creating, and they often lose sight of kind of like what their original unique selling point was or what that core idea was. And I see that happen a lot, which is pretty unfortunate. I think that the best way I've seen developers kind of overcome this is by playtesting it over and over again, not just the game itself and whether it's playable or the mechanics, but also playtesting their idea and making sure that throughout all the stages and all the deliverables, their idea is still present in each of the builds and every part of the game. And it's present also in the tone and every other aspect that goes into it, including marketing assets, audio. But making sure that they keep an eye out on not losing the heart of their game, I think is something that's pretty important.
Speaking of testing, Richard, you've been on the ground for so many years in the game industry. You've seen a lot of good apps. You've seen a lot of bad apps. When we talk about testing, what are we talking about how to make these apps better? Why is testing even important, I guess?
Testing is key because there's a bunch of you in this room, right? Just because you know how the game works and you know how to play it, it feels fine to you, doesn't mean the person right next to you will feel good with it, the person right behind you will. So you should really test that out, right? Because you want your app to be consistent. If it needs to be comfortable. You want it to be if it's going to be the first app that somebody's going to try in VR, you want to make sure that it's an enjoyable experience. And they can say, my first app that I tried was whoever's game. And the only way you're going to get there is by testing your app many, many times over and over again. Try it with people you don't know. Try it with people you do know. Try it with new users. And Marty recommends this usually. Try it with blind testing. Because what you want to do is make sure that quality of the experience works for as many people as you possibly can. Because the only way to sell your title to thousands of people is to make sure thousands of people can actually play it. Hundreds of thousands of people, you need to make sure a lot of people can play it even more, right? So how much more testing does that require? So think about how much you want your game to be successful and how much you should really test that. And that's going to be one of the major keys to success.
Fantastic. Well, that's it. The softball's over. We're going to get a little spicier. Here we go. So there's such thing as a unique to VR mechanic, something that could be done in VR that can't really be replicated in 2 dimensions. Is this something that we feel as a content team that a game needs to be good? Do they have to have a unique to VR mechanic to be good? Go.
I have strong opinions on this, so I can start. I think when you look at the landscape of all the different ways that we can entertain ourselves through phones and through other gaming platforms and videos and everything that we can consume. With VR has like a higher barrier to entry because you're gonna put this thing on your head. And then you look at that extra friction that users have to go through. Yeah, you have to have some sort of draw, something that they can't do in those other environments that gets them through that hurdle to go dig out their headset and go check out and see what's happening in VR.
Yeah, and just to build off that from like the designing perspective, I personally find it more interesting to design for mechanics that I don't see in other mediums. I feel like that's what draws me to VR designing in particular. Like I could do 2D designing, but I feel like there's so much more to explore in the realm of affordances in VR that I don't really get in designing for consoles and desktops. So I feel like that's what draws me to experiences that have unique to VR mechanics.
Can I be the contrarian for a minute? I think you just need to have a good game or good software. But I also will say that like the systems that work in non-VR systems, some of them work in VR and some of them don't, right? Like locomotion is like the classic one for us. It took us forever to figure out how you were going to move in first person. And we still, the systems we have in VR today are getting pretty good, but they're not nearly as mature or robust as we have like on a game console or on a PC. But I also think there's a bunch of stuff that games on traditional platforms in particular spend a huge amount of effort to achieve that is almost free in VR. It's sort of effortless. And that's I don't want to be like the 57th instance of people saying presence at this conference today, but like because I play nothing but old horror games. Horror games spend all this time trying to make you forget you're playing a game, right? Like get rid of the HUD, and get rid of like your life bar, and get rid of like all of the information that would remind you that what you're actually playing is a system. Because what a horror game wants to do is it wants you to forget about the systems and be part of the world, and so that you'll be scared when the big monster pops out or whatever. But in Japan, or in a game rather that is a VR game, I can put you in a environment, and in VR you just believe that you're there. Like if the environment's well built and the software is performant, like that feeling of being there is almost automatic. And beyond that, like that is a piece of software leveraging the strength that VR has without actually deploying some sort of new specific to VR system. It's more like that the medium is a particularly good fit for this particular type of content. And in fact, some of the systems that are necessary for example, horror games aren't even necessary at all in VR. And you can remove a whole bunch of that stuff because you get it for free. So I would say it's not, we do see, the counter argument would be like, we do see the most popular things, the things that sell the most on our platform, generally being things you can't play anywhere else. When you can't imagine a Beat Saber really on a 2D screen. And Superhot exists on a 2D screen, and it's a completely different type of game. It's a completely different experience. So there's definitely a lot of value in leaning into things that only VR can do. But I think it's really context specific because some of that would just be choosing the right software to build for what VR is good at.
So kind of jumping off of that, since VR gives you a lot of things for free, but a lot of what's happening at Oculus Connect is like the time is now, and part of that time is like moving beyond the novelty of VR, right? Like, so what does a game need, what does the title need to jump off of that, what you get for free, the novelty stuff? What do you think?
I have an answer for this one.
Go ahead, take it.
It needs meat. It needs meat on the bone. Like it needs to have content. Like in the early phase, so I've been at Oculus for 5 years. And in the early days of VR, we saw a lot of software that was basically just, an experiment. Like let's see what happens if you are, on a speedboat in VR, or let's see what happens if you're deep underwater, or let's see what happens if you're on the surface of the moon, or if you're in the crushing spike room from Indiana Jones. Like whatever it is, like let's just experiment with putting you in a space because that was new and interesting. Let's be on a roller coaster. What does that feel like? As the technology has matured, the audience has matured as well. And I think that our contemporary audience is not going to sit down and pay money or use their time to like have an application that's very, very thin, but does the thing of just teleporting you into an experiment. Like the there is an audience for tech demos and for like interesting experiences. And in particular on PC, we see those things have more legs than they do on other platforms. But that general VR audience is looking for things that look like software that they're used to on other platforms. Like when I buy a video game on my Nintendo Switch or my PlayStation or my Steam account or whatever, I have some expectation about how long that thing is going to be, how much value I'm going to get for the cost, sort of the level of fidelity, the level of interaction. And that same expectation applies to VR. We've seen that people aren't willing to pay a premium just because it's in VR, but the other half of that is they have an expectation that if something looks like a game or something they would buy on another platform, they expect it to be that way, which I think just means it needs to have content. It needs to have some longevity to it and some depth and complexity, as well as fit and finish. That's what I think our modern sort of VR customers looking for. And as we expand to a larger and larger audience, that's going to be the default expectation.
I just want to say one thing about that. I agree with you on that one. One thing that's interesting is that video games have been around for a very long time, since table tennis for two on the oscilloscope, forgot which computer they used it. And so the language of video games think about that. The language of video games have been around for a long time, but the language of VR is still growing and changing every single day, and every single one of you has the opportunity to influence and change that language. So if I make a silly motion right now, we kind of get what that means, right? But what is it like in a game? And that's something that's really cool about VR-specific titles, is that you can actually help define that language and make it so maybe that, like Beat Saber now is kind of a great example of a game that if you see somebody waving their arms around, you don't know what they're doing, you could say, oh, they're probably playing Beat Saber. They help define that language. And that's something that's really wonderful about VR-specific titles and kind of mechanics, is that you can help define that.
Awesome. So we've talked about some of the technical performance stuff, some of the content stuff. I kind of want to shift gears to talk about some of the stuff you do after all that stuff is done, the marketing. What are some of the common pitfalls that we're seeing in marketing of VR titles right now?
They don't do it. We have, well, okay, no, I mean, not to like be shady, but like we do see developers who like think that their expectation is that, okay, like I got into the store, I'm gonna be successful now, right? And like they expect like just being in the store is their discovery and customer acquisition plan. And there's like things that we do, but like that's not gonna be the case. You should also like, while you're in development, be building your audience, be showing off your title, be getting feedback from people so people are there with you. And then at the moment you launch, you already have an audience of people who are excited to see your title and decided to buy your title. So yeah, do marketing.
Yeah, and there's tons of resources available on Oculus that a lot of people, I see a lot of developers that don't utilize these at all. For example, Oculus events, we see like AAA studios use these events and become really successful and get a lot of visibility, but as well as Oculus Weekly promotions. There's actually a Unity course that most of the people on this panel have worked on that walks through marketing and how to do it, how to start it, has a whole bunch of documentation on what you can do to start marketing early on. But I feel like a lot of developers usually ignore that or do it way last minute after they've launched to try to make up for some of the visibility that they lost. But one thing that Bruce always says that I always feel like is really powerful is that you can only launch one time. So make sure that launch is strong. Don't just launch because you have to, like get it on a certain day or something. Like make sure that it's purposeful and that you're building up to it instead of just releasing for the heck of it.
And then to add on more to Mari's the one who led the go-to-market and the Unity training for when we released that. But I think part of the reason why developers don't do it until after they've launched is because it's all on them. This is a really hard job. Don't underestimate how much time it takes to actually be getting this content out and engaging with your consumer base. But if you're also like getting your game out the door, you don't have time to do those things at the same time. So find someone else who can help cover that for you, and you'll see greater success from that.
Nice. This is good, so we're gonna go deeper and get more granular. We are not just gonna talk about this in theory. We have created an asset. A sample asset that we're going to tear apart. No one's feelings will be hurt. We made this internally. It's okay. But here's an asset here, Video Cart Lucy. It is in compliance with all of the Oculus guidelines, but
This is like key art for the store or something, right? This is like
Yeah.
you would see this in the
This is the hero art asset that you would have. It would be the first asset that consumers see on the store. It would be the biggest thing that they see. And just as Bruce said, it meets all of our guidelines. Like everything's inside of the space that we want the title to be in. It has a complete title. It also even features characters, which is one thing that we see a lot of assets do really well if they feature characters from the game or environments from the game or mechanics. And this features all of them because it has the skyline, the character, and the plane. The pitfall is that we have no idea what this game is or what those things are in this hero asset.
And I want to, like, just to set a little bit of context, we can, like, you can look at this graphic and be like, haha, that's terrible. We see like 50 of these a day that's like, look like this, right? And we're like, okay, impact font, cool. We got a little bit of HDR on the plane there, neat. I enjoy that the buildings actually have the windows cut out of them in the polygons. You know, well, I don't know what this is. Like, I don't know what video card. Like, your customer doesn't understand what this is. This is we can thank Marty for making this, and we don't have to actually throw a real developer who's here in the audience under the bus.
We're not on Carmack.
This is a terrible asset, right? But this is not uncommon. This type of asset, this level of complexity is not uncommon. And the problem is, this might be a great piece of software. Like, if you put your software up with this as your representation, your customers aren't going to know that it's good or even what it is.
Yeah, exactly. I think that kind of feeds into what I was saying earlier about making sure you test every part of your game. Like, test this asset, release it on your social media channels, show it to your friends, and just see if they can get what the game is about from just looking at this asset. And I guarantee you with this one it'd be kind of difficult, but the feedback you get from social media and from your friends about this asset will help you to inform your decisions about your tone and your marketing assets for the rest of your game as well.
And then adding on to, again, my previous comment of like marketing is hard, you should find someone who knows how to do that and can spend time doing it. Developing store assets and all of these marketing images is hard too. And we see a lot of developers who they can make a beautiful in-game environment, but then how to do a 2D just snapshot that represents that and entices users to buy. It's designy, but it's a completely different mindset. So find a designer who can create this for you. It's the biggest impression you will make on users. It's how they will be enticed to come and learn more about your title. So yeah, spend some effort on that. It's worthwhile.
And just to say this one more time, we're making a big deal out of this because you would not believe the number of assets that this team has to go back to the developer and say hey, either you didn't follow the asset guidelines, which are really clearly, there's a link you can get from the thing that says, put your logos here and don't put them here. Or, maybe they've not followed, this follows all the guidelines, but it's just not very good. And it's it's not doing your software justice. We're talking about it a lot today because this team spends a lot of their time trying to get the folks who come to our platform to improve the quality of the thing that they're putting in front of the customer, because this is their first opportunity to actually, potentially get a download or a sale.
And the earlier you start on this process, the earlier you can sell your game. Don't want anybody having to wait 2 to 3 weeks to sell their title or launch their title because they didn't follow the asset guidelines. Just follow them from the beginning, test your assets out, show them to friends, family. Again, just asking people, what do you think about Video Cart Lucy? I personally am a little intrigued because I heard the name, what is Video Cart Lucy? But then I see the asset and I'm like, I don't know what's happening right now. And so that's really important. Again, testing it, following the guidelines, and getting that started now so you can actually get your app launched on time.
We legit had a deep design discussion about what Video Cart Lucy should be.
We did.
Yeah.
That little red triangle, if you can't tell, that's Lucy.
Yeah, it's Lucy. She's waving. No one can tell that though.
She's doing her video carts. Very good. So we're going to move on from that to actually another kind of granular specific thing about the processes of content review at Oculus. This one is for Chris. Why has Oculus decided to be so much more curated on Quest?
Sure, that's a good question. We get it a lot. Well, Lisa alluded to it earlier, is that we have a lot of user research about folks who are using their hardware for the first time. And one of the things that came back to us very strongly was that people were super duper confused. If you go buy a modern game console, it's likely that you are familiar with the top 5 games already because they come from IP that have been around for 30 years, right? You know what those things are. You probably have a lot of trust with the developer. You know that you're going to buy that thing because you've played the last 7 iterations and they're always great. And maybe there's the 5th or 6th thing. You don't know what it is, but hey, you already know that this platform is going to be high quality content, and so you're willing to take a risk even if it's fairly expensive. Our customers are telling us that they actually don't recognize most of the content that's on our platform, which makes sense. Like most of the stuff that we're building comes from smaller teams. There usually happens to be new IP or IP that doesn't have some 30-year legacy, and it's a lot harder for a new customer, particularly one who's not a hardcore enthusiast, who's not like trolling the internet constantly to figure out what the new next big VR game should be. It's harder for them to make an assessment about whether they should spend money on a title that they know nothing about. Which is again why your key art is important. So what we're doing with Quest is, we noticed with Rift is our Rift users in particular, like I said earlier, they're definitely more open as a sort of PC gamer user base. They're more open to experimentation. They're more open to trying new things, even if it's a little bit rough around the edges. And so, but that is a clearly enthusiast crowd. Whereas what we get on Quest looks a lot more like a sort of traditional game console crowd. It's a much wider audience. It's a much more mainstream audience. Those folks have very different expectations. They are not expecting things that are rough around the edges, but they're also expecting to spend money on these things. They're expecting titles that are in the $20, $30, $40, $50 range. So what we're asking developers to do is to talk to us about their projects before they build them for Quest. And the reason is that if we think that what you're building is going to be a fit for this audience, and also that you can show that this is a super cool idea and that you have the capability to do it, and we want to help. We want to supply resources. We will give full QA for your title for free. We'll do all kinds of support. I have a whole team of engineers that will become available when you become part of a managed developer program. But if you're not at that level yet, or if the pitch that you make to us is well, it could be really cool, but it's very difficult for us to assess, then what we're likely to do is ask you to ship on Rift. And the reason is, on Rift, you're going to have a very large and sort of useful audience, and also you can generate some signal. You ship on Rift and show us that hey, guess what? People really like this. Then we'll be like, okay, cool. We weren't sure, but now we get it. And the other reason we ask for it up front as a concept time is so that you don't actually have to spend the development money before we make an assessment. The worst case for me is when a developer spends all of the money and all the time to make a big investment in building their software, and then they get rejected at the very end of the process. Because at that point, you can't get that time and that money back, right? Our goal is to give you some signal about whether we think what you're building is a fit or not as early in the process as we can. So I encourage you to submit. It's a 3-page concept document that we're asking for. It's like a presentation. We have a sample online if you can check it out. Submit that and try to get feedback from us early, because we don't want you to burn your time and money if it's not something that we think is a fit today. And if you do get rejected the first time, we want you to come back. I don't know if you guys saw the quote. There's a title called Richie's Plank Experience that shipped on Quest very recently, and there was a quote from the developer in an article recently, which they talked about. They had submitted initially their initial version of Richie's Plank Experience, and we had said thanks but no thanks, and they took it in stride and they came back with a stronger pitch, which we accepted. Now it's shipped on Quest and it's doing very well. And the developer's feedback was hey, this process caused us to step up. We made better software as a result, and that is absolutely the goal. So I think that's kind of the way we think about it. We're trying to build software and an ecosystem that will generate revenue for a large number of developers. But to do that, we have to meet users at their level of expectation, which is very high.
So now we know the why, but what is Oculus looking for in the Quest pitch? And for those of you that don't know, for Go and for Rift, the process is hey, I submit this app. It goes through technical, publishing, content review, all those things it goes. But the Quest pitch process is essentially you delivering a pitch to Oculus, a 3-pager essentially. Says hey, here's our concept. This is what we're about. But I know I've heard this question out on the floor, what do I do with this pitch? What does Oculus even want from me? What is Oculus thinking about this stuff?
So I think I definitely encourage you to look at the sample that we ship. We ship a sample for a fake game that's here's what a pitch that we would be pretty excited about looks like. And basically what we're looking for is information about what it is you're building, who your audience is, who your team is, and a sense that it's going to be successful. We want to build things that are going to be high quality, that our end customer is going to like, and that have a chance of actually success. If you come to me and you're I'm making Grand Theft Auto, except it's completely online and you can play from Mars. I'm like, I don't think you can actually build that. Like, I don't believe you. But if you come to me and you're like, I've got a team of 4. Here's the 5 last things that we shipped. Here's how well we did on this other platform. By the way, here's a couple of cool screenshots. And in the next 6 months, we're going to ship it with this price point. And this is our target audience. I'm like, you sound like you know what you're doing. And also, I would really like to play that game. It's super important for me to say at this point that we're also looking for content diversity. Like, what I want and what the team up here is actively looking for is stuff that's going to speak to a lot of different people in a lot of different audiences. So, like, if you're making a super awesome first-person shooter, cool, we'd love to hear about it. If you're making a game about vampire cats, I want to hear about that too. If you're making a game about, like, the wind, or you're not making a game at all, you're making something else, I'd like to hear about that as well. The last caveat I'll put on this is we have just announced this morning in the keynote there's an Oculus for Business program. A lot of the pitches that we get are actually not targeted at end customers. They're targeted at sort of B2B plans or things that are business oriented. Those probably shouldn't come through the store. They should probably go through Oculus for Business, and we will refer you to them when we get those sort of pitch. Can I add anything to that?
Nice. Excellent. All right, to switch it up again, Madi, as an indie developer, if you're kind of starting out and wondering what should I target, what should I make, how do you go about making that decision?
Usually for me, that decision comes pretty early on in my developing process. Usually whenever I design things, I start with an idea or like a moment that I want the player to have, and I start building from there. And then I look at all the different platforms and think about which affordances feel the most intuitive to tell that story with or to have that moment with. And it's just all these different things that relate to your game that come together to make that final design. I would say what I usually like to do is make a list of each platform and what each platform does well, and what games you've seen do well on each platform that are similar to yours, comparable to yours, and look at the market that already exists on those platforms to kind of see how your game fits into that piece if you do want to use that platform.
And there's strengths in every single platform, right? If you want to make a great video app or just learn how to, make VR games, picking up a Go is not a problem at all. You totally can make it easy, not easy, but you can totally take the Unity course and make yourself your first PC game, make your first Go game. So work on those platforms that can also work for your budget and work for your skill level and everything. Because the first time I made a game, it was on a Atari 2GS a very long time ago. And so I was just learning BASIC, right? I didn't know anything about C or assembly or anything like that, but I started with what I had and I made some interesting stuff, and I believe everybody could do it too.
And we put a lot of effort into making sure that the APIs on all of our platforms are either exactly the same or very similar. If you're using Unreal or Unity in particular, we tried to abstract the hardware mostly away. Like, your design for a 3DOF platform like Go is going to be very different than your design for any sort of 6DOF platform. But if you're building stuff, particularly if you're building technology or you're learning about VR, and you want to target, for example, Go, not only will the knowledge transfer, but a whole bunch of your code will just run as is on our other platforms as well.
Yeah. Along those same lines, aside from what the platforms are capable of, do you all have something in mind? Like, is there a certain type of content that we don't see enough of, or maybe a certain type of content that is doing particularly well that we want to see more of on the store?
I think first and foremost, so again, we want to see diversity. We want to see what you really care about, and it's something that you can put the time and polish into, show us something that we've never seen before. Be weird. And I will tell you, this team loves the weird stuff. Especially him. There's a piece of content that I use as sort of a litmus test anytime someone joins the content team. I don't know if you're all familiar with a title called Butts VR by Tyler Hurd. Old title. It's basically just the summary. It's about a 60-second non-interactive experience. It's animated. It's just a really fun animation style that's just kind of telling the story of friendship and caring and being together and the power of butts to bring us closer together. And the team is pretty split 50-50 on whether this is the future of VR or this is just a piece of garbage. So legitimately the weird stuff, there's an audience that we will fight for that to exist in the world. So please bring us weird stuff. But other things, just this kind of gets more of on a subjective personal level of the things that we particularly enjoy doing. And I really love simulation experiences. And I want to see more of like, I mean, like how many people live in an apartment? I grew up on a farm. I had horses, I had goats. Like I can't relive that experience on my balcony. If I had just like an app where I could have a horse or in a fish tank or a very large garden, just where I can go and like put myself in an environment and have experiences, interactive experiences that I can't have in my real life. That's the kind of things that I just personally wish we had more of.
And again, the diversity of the ecosystem is really, really important because, you know, everybody's favorite game right now is going to be wildly different from who we ask. I have a personal favorite right now, but I could tell you one great example of a game that, like, I'm not gonna lie, I like first-person shooters. I like a lot of those, right? That's one of my favorite genres. But like one game that was different for me that really got me into it immediately was Defector. It's an Oculus Studios title. How many times can I be a super spy? I'm currently not one. So like one day, you know, if I want to try being one, I'll just play Defector. I had a great time with it, and I felt it was a really good experience, and expressed that there's different ways for me to have the experience of being a super spy in VR that I couldn't get anywhere else. But I could play a first-person shooter a lot of different ways. I will also want to have a garden one day. I'm bad at gardening, so maybe planting VR plants would be really wonderful so I could practice. So it's an opportunity to really kind of expand what we can do here and see people play new experiences, and I'd just love to see that happen.
Like to chime in, I would love to see more tower defense games. Tower defense in VR could be really cool, and you can kind of play with the mental stack with different types of activities because the person actually has to physically reach and do things. Yeah, that's lots of potential, man. You guys should make those and like send them to me and stuff. All right. Sweet. What's next? You know what? I'm gonna stick with you, Richard. I want to ask you, when do you think an app is ready to submit to the store?
Okay. Again, first, I'm going to say this again. Test, test, test. Please test again. So if you haven't done that a bunch, you should definitely be testing it. And when it's ready is when you've actually gone through and checked all the VRCs, you've checked your assets. Does it actually launch? That's something that could totally happen where people submit a game and it doesn't launch. You need to make sure that everything that a consumer would experience is already checked off because that experience has to be consistent. And again, if you're able to do that and actually, again, follow the guidelines and move forward from there, definitely submit it. Fill out all your information. If there's anything missing on your dashboard, make sure you do that. Is your payment information filled out? I hope it is, so please do that. There's a lot of small things that you have to go through, and these are all the details that you definitely need to do, and all of it's right there on a dashboard. A lot of it's also in our guidelines and documentation, so please just take time to read that. And honestly, once you're through all of it, you're ready to go. Make sure all those check boxes are done before you leave. And not leave today, but like before you leave and like go sell your like app. So please do that.
Yeah, and just a really quick plug, there is also a VRC validator on Oculus developer dashboard as well. So if you guys feel like you're in a place where you can ready to submit your game for VRCs and for the content review, just run it through that, and then it'll test for all the things that we test for or that our tech review team tests for. So if you pass all those, it's a pretty good indicator that you're good to go to submit.
From another angle on this, on like how to know that you're ready, in other types of software development, there's a phrase of like, if you are not completely embarrassed by what you ship too late, with like you want to ship early and often to get that feedback. That's actually not what we see in VR. Like we want to see like your more polished experiences. So if you're like, oh yeah, there's some things still I want to fix and like I haven't tweaked that right and that still needs some tuning, do that first. Use your playtesting, definitely like have people playing your title and getting that feedback, but you should feel like, yeah, this is solid. This is like my really solid 1.0.
Awesome, the time is flying, and I want to get in a couple questions that we got from Twitter. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this out to the panel. Initially, VR focused on gaming apps aimed at PC VR games. With more uptake now by a wider demographic and the advent of 6DoF mobile VR, will there be a shift to accept and promote more non-gaming apps? This is from Skywatcher VR.
I'll take that. I think that when we shipped Rift, by definition, you had to have like a big gaming PC to use it. So like there's a very obvious target market for that device because who has big gaming PCs? PC gamers. And it also turns out that PC gamers want to be inside their video games. Like it's a very obvious fit for that target market. But even though we were selling basically a VR game-focused device to folks who have already spent thousands of dollars on their VR gaming habit. We've also seen a lot of uptick of things that are not games at all. Like, we've seen success of things that look like Tilt Brush and Medium, and also, Google Earth. Things that actually have done quite well and have a huge amount of success with this audience. On the mobile side of things, like on Oculus Go, we saw a huge amount of folks who are interested in like watching movies. They want to watch Netflix, because it turns out if you are in a virtual theater that is private, and you're watching the same footage that you could basically watch on any of the screens in your house, that's actually a pretty good experience that a lot of folks would like to do. I think that the thinking about the VR devices as the driver of the content is kind of backwards. It's actually the audience that drives the content. The audience is interested today in video games. We have a very strong signal that what a lot of our audience believes VR to be is for video games. But we've also seen many examples of things that are not games that have done very well or have shown us a huge amount of potential. So particularly on Rift and on Quest, where we have positioned these devices as game devices, we're absolutely interested in seeing things that are non-games. And we've actually seen some success on Quest already with things like Tilt Brush that are able to talk to that same audience, even though their content is not traditional game content. I will say though that for something that's not a game, the same polish and fit and finish and sort of meat advice I gave earlier still applies. Like, folks are not looking for a tech demo. They're not looking for something that, like, okay, if I sign up for the service and I get 5 of us in the room that all have the same device, and I jump through these 5 hoops, and maybe I strap some stuff to my body, then I can use it. Like, that's not going to work for the regular sort of mainstream customer. So whether you're building a game or not, I think that the increasing quality, increasing the sort of polish of what you ship is critical.
Awesome. We're just about out of time, just about to wrap up. But before we close out, I got a chance to sit down with everyone and kind of land on some key takeaways, concrete stuff that we wanted you as our audience to take away before you leave our panel today. The first is about finding the heart of your experience. Mari, what does that mean?
Sure. I mean, you had this great quote at the beginning where you were talking about people remember the feeling that you give them more than they remember the actions or the words, I think, or something like that. And I feel like the heart is exactly that feeling that you give them. So for me, I think the most successful way to find out what the heart is and whether or not it's coming across successfully is to ask your playtesters, if they can describe your game in one word, what would it be? And then that word is generally what the power behind your experience is.
Quickly, ensuring successful VR performance, use the VRC test plan.
I am actually so glad we put this on here, because we did not get into the VRC test plan in our discussion. But that's another one of the tools that we make available to developers, is that for all the VRCs, we have a very detailed test plan that says what to test, step to test, expected result, and then it links off to more resources. It's the exact same test plan we use internally. So if you can take that, run that, pass that, you are very likely to find success getting through the tech review process on our side as well.
Playtest your title with at least 100 people. That's hella people, Richard. Why?
Why? Because you want to make sure that you get 100% of the people that can play your game and hopefully play it successfully and have a good time. There are so many of you in here, so before you leave, or actually after you leave, make sure you say hello to your neighbors and everybody around you. Say, hey, can you test my title out? Make sure that happens. You'll be at least halfway there. So I want to make sure I hear lots of chattering about people exchanging emails after this, okay?
This room is like experts. You guys are all the best possible testers you could possibly find.
Exactly.
Turn to your neighbor and hand to cards or something.
Hey, and if somebody's even asking outside when you're walking out, what is this conference about? Be like, oh, it's VR. Would you want to try my game? That's another person. So
That's awesome.
You can do it.
I like a bacon-wrapped hot dog, and would you like to try my VR game? Consistent messaging.
Tell me what your game's about, man. Tell me why it's going to be awesome, why it's going to blow my mind. Show me the images. Show me the mixed reality trailer, or tell me why this is going to take my workflow. Sell me this title. Don't just put it up there and be like, hey, it's cool. Now you can do this thing that you could never do before because it's VR. Because wow, VR. No, sell it to me. Tell me it's real.
Tell me it's real. Awesome. Well, we are just about out of time, so I'd like everyone to join me in thanking this wonderful panel that we have here. It'd be fantastic. Excellent. So we definitely value and appreciate your feedback. So in the OC6 app, please take the survey, let us know how this panel was, what you wish we would have done. Please give us that feedback. Definitely appreciate it. Like I said, we're not gonna be taking QA. We don't wanna have conversations here. I'm gonna herd this panel directly to the speaker pavilion. It's a terrace that's that way. So if you have deeper questions or have curiosities about what we discussed, please follow us there. And that about wraps it up. So everyone have a wonderful OC6, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.